June 15th, 2022. A forest clearing by a quiet lake. A gentle wind moved through the trees, blankets lay on the grass, and fruit and wine were set out like a simple picnic. Everything looked peaceful, yet the atmosphere felt strangely deliberate, as if every detail had been arranged in advance. 7 men stood nearby, silent, wearing dark clothes and sunglasses. She felt uneasy, but her husband leaned closer and whispered, "Just trust me." One of the men stepped forward, brushing her shoulder lightly. A small moment that suddenly changed everything. Her husband sat apart, watching without looking away. Sometimes a quiet day in nature can begin a story whose ending no one can predict.
I stepped out of Marcus's sedan, into afternoon light, filtered through pine branches. The forest clearing stretched before us, pristine and isolated, with a lake reflecting silver beyond the trees. 7 men stood in a loose semicircle near the water's edge, their dark clothing making them look like shadows against the bright landscape. My husband's hand pressed against my lower back, guiding me forward. "Just trust me," he'd whispered in the car, but now his words felt hollow in the mountain air. The men wore identical dark sunglasses despite the dappled shade. None of them spoke. They simply watched as we approached, their faces unreadable behind the tinted lenses. I counted them again. 7. Wondering why Marcus had been so vague about his friends and their special picnic. The tallest one stood apart from the others, his hands clasped behind his back. He nodded once at Marcus, a gesture so brief I almost missed it, some kind of signal. My stomach tightened. The silence felt deliberate, orchestrated. Even the wind seemed muted here, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. "Vanessa," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying across the clearing. "These are the men I told you about." I hadn't realized my hands were shaking until I clasped them together. The men remained motionless, waiting. For what, I couldn't say, but the weight of their collective attention made my skin prickle. Something was about to begin. The men moved with practiced efficiency, spreading blankets across the grass in a deliberate pattern. No conversation, just purposeful action. One of them produced a wicker basket and began arranging wine bottles and fruit with the care of someone setting a stage. I watched Marcus approach the tall man, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. Occasionally one would glance in my direction, and I felt like merchandise being appraised. "What exactly is this?" I asked when Marcus returned to my side. He poured wine into a glass, the dark liquid catching the light. "An experience," he said, offering me the drink. "Something we've discussed." Had we? I searched my memory for conversations about group gatherings, about sharing intimate moments with strangers. Marcus had always been adventurous in our bedroom talk, but this felt different, real. The men had arranged themselves around the perimeter of the blankets, still silent, still watching. Their presence felt heavy, expectant. I sipped the wine, tasting oak and something deeper, earthier. "I don't understand the rules," I said. Marcus smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "There aren't any rules, just boundaries we choose to cross or respect." The tall man approached us, his footsteps deliberate on the soft ground. He removed his sunglasses for the first time, revealing pale blue eyes that studied my face with unsettling intensity. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and measured. I looked at Marcus, searching for reassurance, for some sign that this was still safe territory. He nodded encouragingly, but something in his expression had changed. Hunger, perhaps, or anticipation. I finished my wine. The tall man extended his hand toward me, palm up, waiting. Around us, the other 6 had positioned themselves closer, forming a loose circle that felt both protective and confining. I glanced at Marcus one more time. He sat on a nearby boulder, wineglass in hand, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Watching, always watching. "It's your choice," the tall man said, his hand still extended. "But once you take it, we move forward together." The word "together" hung in the air between us. I understood now what Marcus had arranged, what he wanted to witness. The conversations we'd had late at night, the fantasies he'd whispered, were taking shape in this secluded clearing. My heart hammered against my ribs. The forest around us felt alive, rustling with possibility and risk. These men, strangers an hour ago, now represented a threshold I'd never imagined crossing. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. The other men stepped closer, forming a tighter circle. I could smell their cologne, feel the heat radiating from their bodies. The afternoon light played across their faces, some kind, some hungry, all focused entirely on me. Breathe, the tall man murmured, his thumb tracing across my knuckles. This is about trust. I breathed. The air tasted of pine and possibility. Marcus shifted on his rock, leaning forward slightly. His wine glass caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the grass. He was exactly where he wanted to be, close enough to see everything, far enough away to remain observer rather than participant. The tall man's other hand rose to brush my shoulder. His fingers grazed my shoulder, seemingly accidental. But nothing here was accidental. The touch sent electricity down my arm, and I felt the circle of men draw imperceptibly closer. The soft fabric beneath our feet cushioned each movement, each shift in weight. I turned toward Marcus, seeking his eyes. He set down his wine and nodded again. That same encouraging gesture, but his breathing had quickened. His hands rested on his knees, fingers pressed white against the fabric of his jeans. The tall man's touch became more deliberate, his palm settling against my shoulder blade. Another man stepped forward, his hand finding the small of my back. Then another, until I was surrounded by warmth and intention. Close your eyes, someone whispered. I did, and the world became sensation, hands guiding me down onto the soft surface beneath us. The rustle of fabric, the sound of Marcus shifting position, moving closer. The lake lapping against the shore in the distance. Are you all right? The tall man's voice closer now. I opened my eyes to find him inches away, his pale blue gaze searching my face. Around us, the others had arranged themselves with careful precision. Marcus had moved to a spot where he could see everything, his wine forgotten, his complete attention fixed on the scene unfolding before him. Yes, I whispered, surprised by the truth of it. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy above, painting everything in gold and shadow. What happened next felt inevitable, like water flowing downhill, like something that had always been meant to occur in this place, at this moment. The camera of my memory would fade to black here, but the consequences would echo forward. Time moved differently in that clearing. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps hours compressed into heartbeats. The men guided me through an experience that felt both ancient and impossibly new. Their movements coordinated as if they'd done this before. I caught glimpses of Marcus between the shifting figures around me. He'd removed his own dark lenses now, his eyes bright with something I'd never seen before. Not jealousy, not anger, but a deep, consuming fascination. He watched every gesture, every interaction, as if memorizing details for later. The sky above us deepened from blue to gold as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Somewhere in that transition, boundaries dissolved. What I'd thought were my limits proved to be suggestions, easily discarded when tested. The tall man's hands were gentle but insistent, guiding me through each new threshold. The others followed his lead, creating a rhythm that felt choreographed yet spontaneous. I lost track of individual touches, individual faces, until there was only sensation and the awareness of Marcus watching from his chosen distance. When the crescendo came, it was under that open sky, with the lake reflecting the first hints of sunset, and my husband's gaze burning into me from across the clearing. The sound I made echoed off the water and disappeared into the trees. Afterward, in the golden quiet that followed, I lay on the soft fabric and looked up at the canopy of leaves. The men had pulled back, giving me space to breathe, to process what had just occurred. Marcus remained exactly where he'd been throughout, his expression unreadable now, his wine glass empty beside him. The men began to gather their things with the same quiet efficiency they'd shown in setting up. No one spoke about what had happened, as if words might somehow cheapen or complicate it. They folded the unused corners of fabric, packed away the remaining fruit, and corked the half-empty bottles. Marcus finally moved from his observation point, approaching me with careful steps. His face showed a mixture of concern and satisfaction, as if he'd conducted a successful experiment but wasn't entirely sure of the results. "How do you feel?" he asked, settling beside me on the grass. I considered the question seriously. My body hummed with aftershocks, my skin still sensitive to the evening breeze. But deeper than the physical was something else, a sense of having crossed a bridge I couldn't uncross. Different, I said finally. He smiled, the expression genuine now. Good different. I watched the men loading their cars in the parking area beyond the trees. They moved like professionals completing a job, courteous but detached. Only the tall man looked back once, catching my eye with a brief nod that might have been thanks or farewell. Yes, I said, and meant it. Marcus poured the last of the crimson liquid into his glass, swirling it thoughtfully. I hoped you would say that. The sun touched the mountain peaks now, painting the lake orange and pink. Soon it would be dark, and we would drive home to our normal life, carrying this secret between us. But I could see in Marcus's eyes that he didn't want this to be the end. He wanted more, different variations on the theme we'd just explored. The tall man's car pulled away, followed by the others, until only our sedan remained in the clearing. Marcus moved closer, his arms encircling me with a tenderness that felt both familiar and strange. This was my husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years, but something fundamental had shifted between us in the past hour. I love you, he whispered against my hair, and I heard layers in those 3 words I'd never noticed before. Love, yes, but also possession, gratitude, and something darker that might have been hunger. I leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against my back. His hands settled on my waist, not claiming but anchoring. Around us, the forest grew quiet as evening approached, the birds settling into their roosts. Did you enjoy watching? I asked. His arms tightened slightly, more than I expected to. The honesty in his voice surprised me. Marcus had always been careful with his words, diplomatic even in our most intimate moments, but this experience had stripped away some of his usual guardedness. I kept thinking I should feel jealous, he continued, but instead I felt proud, watching you discover something new about yourself. I turned in his arms to face him. His eyes held that same bright fascination I'd glimpsed during the encounter, but softer now, more personal. What does this make us? I asked. He considered the question, his thumb tracing small circles on my hip. Honest, maybe, about what we want. The last light faded from the sky, leaving us in the blue twilight that precedes true darkness. In a few minutes, we would need to pack up and drive home, return to the world of responsibilities and normal boundaries. But not yet. We sat together on the soft surface beneath us as stars began to appear overhead. The lake had turned black, reflecting pinpricks of light like scattered diamonds. Somewhere an owl called, its voice hollow and haunting. I've been thinking about this for months, Marcus admitted, planning it, imagining how it might go. I studied his profile in the starlight, seeing the familiar angles of his face shadowed with new complexity. How did you find them? Online communities. People who understand these dynamics. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The tall one, David, he's done this before, helped couples explore boundaries safely. The name gave the experience weight, made it real in a way it hadn't been while it was happening. David, a person with a history, not just a figure in our shared fantasy. And the others? Friends of his, screened, tested, discreet. Marcus turned to meet my eyes. I would never put you at risk. The care in his voice touched something deep in my chest. For all the strangeness of what we'd done, it had been orchestrated with love, with attention to my safety and comfort. So, he said, his voice dropping to that intimate register I knew well. Are you ready to try it in the mountains next time? The question hung between us like a bridge. I could step onto it or remain where I was, safe in the familiar territory of our old marriage. But the woman who had been here this afternoon wasn't the same one who had stepped out of the car hours ago. What did you have in mind? I asked. His smile was answer enough. 6 months later, I stood on a mountain trail, breathing thin air and watching Marcus adjust his backpack straps. The cabin David had recommended sat another mile ahead, tucked into a grove of aspens that would be golden in a few weeks, but now rustled green in the afternoon breeze. This time, there would be fewer men, Marcus had explained. More intimate, a weekend instead of an afternoon, with time to explore the psychological as well as the physical dimensions of what we'd discovered about ourselves. I thought about the woman I'd been in that forest clearing. surprised by her own capacity for surrender. She felt like a different person, though I knew she'd always been there, waiting beneath the surface of my careful, conventional life. Second thoughts? Marcus asked, noticing my pause on the trail. I adjusted my own pack, feeling the weight of it settle across my shoulders. No, just thinking about how we got here. The path ahead wound through stands of pine and granite outcroppings, leading toward whatever waited in that secluded cabin. Marcus had shown me photos: a stone fireplace, picture windows overlooking a valley, a hot tub on the deck. Amenities that suggested comfort, intimacy, time to savor what we'd rushed through in the forest. I could see in his eyes that same bright fascination that had captivated me months ago. But now it was tempered with something deeper, understanding perhaps of what we'd awakened in each other. The price of our choices had been the innocence of our old marriage. We could never go back to being the couple who'd driven to that clearing 6 months ago. But what we'd gained felt worth the cost. I smiled at my husband, shouldered my pack more securely, and continued up the mountain trail toward whatever came next. The trail grew steeper as we climbed, but my legs felt strong beneath me. 6 months of hiking had changed my body as much as everything else had changed. Behind me, I could hear David's steady breathing, the familiar rhythm of his footsteps on the packed earth. We learned to move together again, differently than before, but with a synchronicity that felt earned rather than assumed. Remember when we used to argue about who carried the heavier pack? I called back to him, adjusting the straps that now felt perfectly balanced across my shoulders. His laugh carried on the mountain air. You mean when I used to insist on carrying everything and you'd get mad about it? And now look at us. I gestured to our matching loads, our equal stride. Who would have thought learning to share the weight would be the easy part? The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We'd stumbled through the more complex terrain of sharing ourselves with others, of redefining the boundaries of our marriage, of jealousy and desire and trust rebuilt from scratch. But dividing up camping gear? That had become second nature. We reached a rocky outcrop that offered a view of the valley below. David moved up beside me, and we stood together looking out over the landscape we'd covered. In the distance, I could see the glint of the lake where we'd made camp last night, where Sarah had joined us for what might be the last time before her job transfer to Portland, where Marcus had surprised us all by bringing his guitar and playing until the stars came out. "Do you miss how simple it used to be?" David asked, following my gaze. I considered the question seriously. Simple. Yes, our marriage had been simple once. Predictable. Safe. We'd moved through our days like dancers following choreography. We'd learned by heart, never questioning the steps. Sometimes, I admitted, but I don't think I'd trade this for simple anymore. He nodded slowly. Even knowing what we know now, about how messy it gets? Especially knowing that. I turned to face him fully. We're not the same people who drove up here that first time, but I like who we've become. I like who I've become. And it was true. The woman who'd sat in that passenger seat 6 months ago had been afraid of her own desires, convinced that wanting more meant being ungrateful for what she had. She lived in a world of either or, where love was finite and had to be hoarded rather than shared. The woman standing on this mountain had learned that the heart's capacity wasn't fixed, that trust could be rebuilt stronger than before, that marriage could be a foundation rather than a cage. Besides, I added, shouldering my pack again, we're not done yet. Portland's only 3 hours from here. Sarah said she'd find us a good hiking spot up there. David grinned, the same expression that had first caught my attention across a college coffee shop 15 years ago, but somehow brighter now. Planning our next adventure already? Always. I started up the trail again, feeling the pull of the summit ahead. After all, we've got a lot more territory to explore. Behind me, I heard his footsteps resume their steady rhythm, following my lead this time. The mountain stretched above us, vast and full of possibilities we were finally brave enough to climb toward together.